3 minutes that made a studio drummer apologize to Roger Taylor. Los Angeles, fall 1977. A Hollywood party filled with music industry professionals, and one studio drummer who just made the mistake of grabbing a microphone and announcing to the entire room, "Real musicians can play any instrument, but rock stars just pose. I bet Queen's lead singer can't even hit a drum." The laughter hadn't even died down when the door opened. Roger Taylor walked in, heard the last sentence, locked eyes with Freddie Mercury across the room, and in that single glance, an entire conversation happened without a single word spoken. What happened in the next 3 minutes didn't just silence that drummer. It made him walk across the room an hour later and apologize. Not because anyone forced him, but because he'd just witnessed something that shattered every assumption he'd built his entire career on. This is the story of the night Roger Taylor proved that the quietest response is sometimes the loudest. The night a man who'd spent 10 years mocking others learned what real excellence looks like. And the night Queen reminded Hollywood exactly why underestimating them was always a catastrophic mistake. But to understand why those 3 minutes mattered so much, you need to understand what was happening to Queen in America in 1977. And why one bitter studio musician had convinced himself that everything they'd achieved was fake. By late 1977, Queen owned the United Kingdom. Bohemian Rhapsody had spent 9 weeks at #1. Their albums sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Their concerts were legendary spectacles of theatrical energy that nobody else could match. But America was different. The American music industry had always been brutal territory for British bands. The audience wanted different things. Radio formats didn't accommodate 6-minute operatic rock songs. And there was a chronic skepticism about British acts, a sense that they were all style over substance, that the real music was being made by American artists who understood what rock and roll actually meant. Queen had made progress. Somebody to Love had been a hit. News of the World was climbing the charts. But certain doors remained stubbornly closed. And the resistance wasn't coming from fans or critics. It was coming from inside the industry itself. Specifically, from American musicians who'd been working for years without achieving a fraction of Queen's success. To these people, Queen's complex harmonies and elaborate stage shows weren't impressive. They were proof of fakery. All that production, all those overdubs, all that theatrical nonsense, it was just covering up the fact that they couldn't really play. Tommy Castellano had convinced himself this was gospel truth. Castellano had been a studio drummer in Los Angeles for nearly a decade. He was technically competent. He could keep time. He could deliver the reliability that session work required. Show up, play what you're told, collect your check, move on to the next gig. But he'd never achieved what he'd dreamed of achieving. His name never appeared in large letters. Album covers didn't feature his photograph. Stadiums didn't fill to hear him play. This chronic disappointment had curdled into something toxic over the years. He'd convinced himself that he hadn't been given enough chances, that others had risen while he'd stayed in place because the industry was broken, because people didn't recognize real talent anymore, because flashy performers were stealing attention from genuine musicians, and British bands, especially Queen, became his favorite targets. Led Zeppelin was overrated. The Who was more circus than music. And Queen was a fake music factory lost in its own spectacle. The criticism wasn't about music. It was about jealousy. Queen had everything Castellano wanted and would never have, but acknowledging that required acknowledging his own limitations. So instead, he told himself a different story. They're not real musicians. I'm a real musician. That night, with several drinks giving him courage he didn't normally possess, he decided to voice this story out loud. But first, we need to understand the man who was about to walk through that door. Roger Meadows Taylor was born July 26, 1949, in Norfolk, England. Music found him early, ukulele at 7, guitar as a teenager, but drums became his true language, the instrument where he could say things that words couldn't express. Roger was largely self-taught. No conservatory training, no formal education in percussion, just hours of practice and an almost instinctive understanding of rhythm, of how drums could drive a song forward or pull it back, of how percussion could be both foundation and melody. Before Queen, Roger had fronted a band called The Reaction, playing drums while simultaneously serving as lead vocalist. This dual role revealed something essential about who he was. Roger Taylor wasn't a background rhythm keeper. He was a complete artist who could command a stage with both his voice and his presence. When he formed Smile with Brian May, his skills continued sharpening. Freddie Mercury's arrival completed the four-person lineup, and what emerged transcended the simple sum of parts. Roger's contribution to Queen went far beyond keeping time. He wrote songs. He added upper vocal harmonies that perfectly complemented Freddie's voice. He brought controlled but aggressive energy to the music. And he had zero tolerance for anyone disrespecting his band. This last quality would prove decisive that night. The Hollywood venue was exactly the kind of place where music industry people gathered to see and be seen. Producers, managers, journalists, musicians of varying calibers. These parties served as both networking opportunities and visibility exercises. Queen was attending as part of their American promotional campaign. But a radio interview that ran long meant Freddie Mercury, Brian May, and John Deacon arrived late. Roger Taylor had taken a separate taxi and got stuck in even worse traffic. When the first three Queen members entered, attention immediately shifted their direction. Freddie couldn't enter a room without changing it. His presence was simply too large, too theatrical, too undeniably himself. Brian's height and distinctive curly hair made him impossible to miss. John moved beside them as the band's reliable calm center. They found a corner near the bar and settled in. Tommy Castellano, meanwhile, was several drinks deep. The alcohol had loosened his tongue considerably. Seeing Queen members across the room, he felt like he'd been handed an opportunity, a chance to finally say out loud what he'd been thinking for years. He grabbed a microphone. The room quieted slightly, people turning toward the sound. "Real musicians can play any instrument," he announced with alcohol-fueled confidence. "But rock stars just pose. I bet Queen's lead singer can't even hit a drum." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Castellano smiled, satisfied with himself. That's when the door opened. Roger Taylor stepped into the room and immediately sensed something off. The crowd's attention was focused on a specific point. Then he spotted Freddie, Brian, and John at the bar. Their faces showed a mixture of controlled anger and deliberate calm. Then he heard the man at the microphone finish his sentence. Roger stood motionless in the doorway for exactly 1 second, processing, understanding. Then his eyes found Freddie's. These two men had been making music together for nearly a decade, countless hours in studios, on stages, in tour buses, in rehearsal rooms. They'd argued, celebrated, faced failure, achieved triumph. That kind of shared experience creates a language that goes beyond words. Freddie's look asked, "Did you hear that?" Roger's look answered, "I heard it. I'll handle it." That silent exchange was the most important conversation of the entire night. Roger started walking toward Castellano. No rush, no visible anger. His face showed something harder to read than rage, a calm that made people instinctively step aside as he passed. Castellano didn't notice at first. He was still enjoying the laughter his joke had generated, still feeling clever and validated. Then he realized someone was standing directly in front of him. Roger Taylor. They looked at each other for several seconds. The room had gone quiet. Everyone could feel something about to happen. Then Roger reached for the drumsticks Castellano was holding, props he'd been using during his real musician speech. Castellano, too shocked to resist, let them go. Roger examined the sticks, looked at the drum kit set up on the small stage area, turned back to Castellano. "Mind if I try?" His voice was calm, almost polite, but underneath, pure steel. Castellano shrugged, even managed a slight smile. "Sure, go ahead." He still thought he had control of this situation. He had no idea how wrong he was. Roger sat down at the drum kit, adjusted the seat to his specifications, went through the brief ritual every drummer performs, getting acquainted with an unfamiliar instrument. Every drum kit is different. Sizes, heights, cymbal placements, tension on the heads. A professional listens first, then speaks. The crowd waited. The first beats were simple, a basic rock rhythm that any competent drummer could handle. Some people in the crowd exchanged glances. Is that all?" kind of look. Roger was just warming up. Within 15 seconds, the rhythm began evolving. More complex, more dynamic. His hands accelerated into syncopations, unexpected accents, sudden silences that made the next beat hit harder. The foot pedal work became intricate, varied. The cymbal work added layers. By the 1-minute mark, Roger had fully opened up. What he launched into was architecture, built from years of accumulated skill. Rapid-fire sequences across the snare, thunderous rolls moving across the toms, explosive accents on the cymbals. His entire body was inside the music, shoulders moving, head nodding, every motion purposeful and precise. The crowd froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Drinks sat forgotten on tables. The bartenders paused without meaning to. And Tommy Castellano stood there, color draining from his face, watching the man he'd dismissed not just play drums, but redefine what drums could mean. Roger wasn't just keeping rhythm. He was telling a story, building tension, creating dynamics that moved from whisper-quiet precision to thunderous power and back again, making the drums sing, speak, shout, whisper. This wasn't percussion, it was conversation, argument, declaration, all happening through wood and skin and metal. The technical mastery was undeniable, but what made it transcendent was the musicality. Roger wasn't showing off. He was communicating. Every fill served the music. Every accent had purpose. This was what separated real artists from competent technicians, the ability to make technical skill serve emotional truth. Approximately 3 minutes after he'd started, Roger hit the final beat, let the cymbal ring out, fade into silence, left his hands suspended in the air for a moment. Complete silence, then applause. Started with those closest to the stage, spread backward like a wave, growing, strengthening, filling the entire room. People stood. Industry veterans who'd seen everything applauded with genuine enthusiasm. Musicians who'd been watching as competitors forgot that competitive impulse and clapped with pure respect. When the applause finally settled, Roger stood. His breathing was slightly elevated, but his face remained calm. He walked to Castellano and held out the drumsticks. "Thanks for letting me try," he said. His voice was polite, gracious, not even a shadow of mockery or triumph. Then, in a voice only those nearby could hear, he added something that hit Castellano like a physical blow. "Real musicians don't just talk, they play." No shouting, no threats, but the words landed with devastating accuracy. Castellano took the sticks with trembling hands. His face had gone red, that strange color that comes from mixing shame with alcohol. He couldn't meet Roger's eyes. Roger turned and walked back to his bandmates. Freddie greeted him with a smile that said everything. Brian touched his shoulder lightly. John gave that characteristic small nod that, in John Deacon's language, translated to highest praise. As the night continued, something had fundamentally shifted. People approached Queen with different energy now. The respect had changed quality, less about fame, more about witnessed excellence. What had just happened spread faster than gossip. Within an hour, everyone at the party knew about those 3 minutes. But the night's most unexpected moment hadn't happened yet. Instead of leaving in humiliation, Tommy Castellano walked across the room toward Roger Taylor. This required courage. Or maybe it was just conscience. Standing face to face with someone who just publicly dismantled you wasn't easy. But Castellano came. "I'm sorry," he said. The earlier arrogance had completely evaporated. "What I said was wrong. I didn't know—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Roger listened, then extended his hand. "It's forgotten," he said. "We all say things we regret sometimes." They shook hands, and there, in that moment, Roger Taylor's real character emerged. He'd won decisively, but he didn't use it for ego satisfaction. He'd proven his point, but he didn't weaponize that proof to destroy someone. For the next several minutes, Roger actually talked with Castellano about drumming, shared stories about his own learning process, offered some practical suggestions about technique, treated with respect the man who'd tried to humiliate him. This was the real person behind the rock star image. And maybe this moment taught the night's most important lesson. Winning matters, but how you win matters just as much. In the days following the party, the story of those 3 minutes circulated through Los Angeles music circles. As weeks passed, The legend grew, but the essential truth remained unchanged. Roger Taylor, sitting at a drum kit and silencing a room, had been burned into the industry's collective memory. Queen had broken through prejudice before with the power of their music. This time the stage was different, but the fundamental principle was identical. They didn't respond to criticism with words, didn't complain, didn't defend. They simply played and let excellence speak. For Castellano, that night became a turning point. In subsequent years, he never spoke about Queen again. According to people who knew him, he adopted a more humble approach generally, less critical of others, more demanding of his own work. Shame sometimes is the most effective teacher. When the topic came up, Roger usually just shrugged. "I just played drums," he'd say. "That's my job." But people who'd been there knew better. They hadn't watched a drum solo that night. They'd watched a statement. The best possible way to prove yourself. A dismissal silenced. And something rarer still. Someone choosing generosity even while holding all the power. 20 years later, a music journalist asked Roger about that night, about whether he'd been angry, about whether he'd wanted to humiliate Castellano. Roger's answer was characteristically direct. "I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I was defending my band. There's a difference. When someone says something ignorant about people you care about, you don't get mad. You get clear. You show them the truth, and then you let them decide what to do with it." The journalist pressed, "But you must have enjoyed proving him wrong." Roger thought about this for a moment. "Honestly? No. I enjoyed playing drums. That's what I always enjoy. The fact that it proved a point was secondary. The primary thing was getting to sit at an unfamiliar kit and see what I could make it say. That's the part that matters, the conversation with the instrument, not the argument with the critic." This answer revealed everything about why Roger Taylor was, and is, extraordinary. For him, music genuinely came first. The validation, the triumph, the silenced critics, those were side effects. The actual point was always the music itself. Brian May, asked about the same night, laughed. "Roger has this amazing quality where he can absolutely destroy someone and make it look like an act of kindness. He didn't go after Castellano. He just existed at a level Castellano couldn't reach. And he did it so casually, so naturally, that it didn't look like an attack. It looked like education." Freddie Mercury's take was more philosophical. People who criticize from the sidelines fundamentally misunderstand what artistry means. They think it's about technique or skill or knowledge, but real artistry is about truth, finding your truth and expressing it so completely that it becomes universal. Roger didn't just play well that night, he played truthfully, and truth silences lies without needing to argue. John Deacon, predictably, said almost nothing. But when pressed, he offered this. "Roger did what Roger does. He played. That's always been enough." Since 1977, Roger Taylor has played drums on some of rock history's greatest stages. He's written songs that millions know by heart. He's filled stadiums. But somehow, those 3 minutes in a Hollywood party, every beat, every rhythm, every statement made through percussion, remained present in everything that followed. Because real musicians don't just talk, they play. And when they play with the kind of truth, skill, and fierce dedication that Roger Taylor brought to that drum kit on that autumn night in Los Angeles, they don't just silence critics, they transform them. Tommy Castellano never became famous, never filled stadiums, never saw his name in big letters. But after that night, the people who knew him said he changed, became kinder, more humble, more focused on his own growth than on others' perceived failings. That's what real excellence does. It doesn't just prove you wrong. It shows you a better way to be. And maybe that's the real lesson from those 3 minutes. Roger Taylor didn't just defend Queen's honor that night. He showed everyone watching what greatness actually looks like when you strip away ego and competition and bitterness. It looks like sitting at a drum kit and playing with such complete truth that everything false in the room has no choice but to burn away. It looks like extending your hand to someone who tried to humiliate you and treating them with dignity they didn't earn. It looks like walking away from victory without needing to gloat, because the victory itself was never the point. The music was the point. That's what Roger Taylor taught Hollywood in fall 1977, and it's a lesson some people still remember nearly 50 years later, because some moments don't fade. Some performances outlive the night they happened. Some 3-minute drum solos become legend not because of technical brilliance, though that was certainly present, but because they revealed character, principle, and a kind of grace that's almost vanishingly rare. And when they're done playing, they extend their hand to the person who doubted them and help them understand what music really means. And that's why, almost 50 years later, people still talk about the night Roger Taylor made a studio drummer apologize.